What if famous historical figures like Cleopatra or Napoleon had Twitter accounts? Can you imagine? The idea of these towering figures from history typing away on their smartphones, adding hashtags to their most famous quotes, and firing off tweets with the same boldness and drama they brought to their dynasties, battles, and political moves. The sheer thought of Cleopatra tapping away from her Egyptian palace with the Nile at her back, or Napoleon posting on the front lines of battle with the fate of Europe hanging in the balance, makes the mind spin. And of course, let's not forget their followers. Can you picture the amount of retweets, memes, and viral moments that would have erupted from these figures? It would have been pure chaos. So let's have a little fun and dive into the hypothetical world of history's greats with Twitter accounts. What would their first tweet be? Let's start with Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, who was famous not just for her beauty, but for her intelligence, her political acumen, and her very calculated relationships with powerful men like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Now imagine her getting her hands on a smartphone with a glittering gold case. Her first tweet? It would definitely be bold, filled with confidence, and probably a little playful, a mix of power and charm. Something like, not just a pretty face. Crown #Queen #Pharaoh vibes #Egyptian goddess. You can almost hear her flipping her hair while typing, knowing full well that Twitter is her stage now. She would have a killer Twitter bio too, something like, Queen, politician, lover of drama, #ancient power. And let's be real, she'd totally start Twitter wars with anyone who dared challenge her, especially with rival powers like Rome. She might tweet things like, Rome thinks they can handle me? They're about to find out. #Cleopatra takes over, or post cryptic photos of herself with captions like, you can never truly conquer a queen. #Queen of the Nile #watch this space. Now Napoleon Bonaparte. The man was practically made for Twitter. Short in stature, big in ambition, and absolutely relentless in his pursuit of power. He would have been all over social media. His first tweet? It would probably be something like, Europe prepare to be conquered. #Napoleon rules #master of strategy, with a map of Europe pinned to his profile. If there was one thing Napoleon loved, it was showing off his military genius and his belief in destiny, so you know he'd constantly be tweeting about his conquests, updating his followers on the next battlefield triumph. Just conquered another one. #Napoleon is back #French Empire would be an instant classic, and he'd probably tweet some motivational stuff too. After all, the man had an ego the size of his empire. A day without victory is a day wasted. #conquer everything #rise up. Might show up after one of his smaller victories. But of course his feed would be full of political rants and strategic memes like, why conquer one country when you can conquer them all? #Napoleon knows #one-man army. Followed by a selfie of him with his military hat at a jaunty angle, looking like he's about to take over the world. He'd also probably start a #Napoleon complex to claim his place in history and remind everyone constantly how much bigger he was than anyone gave him credit for. Then there's the big one, Abraham Lincoln. Honest Abe with a Twitter handle? It's almost too perfect. He'd be that one guy on Twitter who's always dropping wisdom, getting deep about leadership, and quoting from the Gettysburg Address at random intervals. His first tweet would probably be something like, the nation shall have a new birth of freedom. #United we stand #emancipation #civil war, with a picture of the American flag waving behind him. Abe would definitely use Twitter as a platform to advocate for equality and freedom, but in that quiet, humble, almost fatherly way. You know he'd tweet things like, do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends? #leadership #life lessons #civil rights, or maybe even drop some humorous one-liners about politics like, if I had 9 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 6 sharpening my axe. #work smarter not harder. He would be a quiet influencer, never boasting, always focused on the greater good of the country. And I'm sure he'd get into a few Twitter beefs with political opponents of his time, just as calmly as he did in real life. Maybe a tweet like, you don't free people by keeping them divided. #unity for the win, would definitely spark some heated responses. Then there's the wild card, Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France who famously allegedly said, let them eat cake, though we know she probably didn't. If Marie Antoinette had a Twitter account, it would be a disaster in the best way. Picture her, sitting in her lavish palace surrounded by extravagant luxuries, tweeting about her life like she was living in some glamorous fantasy. Her first tweet might be, "Why be a queen when you can be a fashion icon? Hashtag let them eat cake, hashtag glamorous life," complete with a picture of her in a ridiculously extravagant gown. She'd tweet about all the expensive, over-the-top fashion trends she's launching, maybe posting something like, "If it doesn't have lace, it's not worth wearing." Hashtag fashion forward, hashtag Marie Antoinette style. While her followers, many starving peasants, would be not so amused. She'd definitely get some serious side-eye from people when she tweets stuff like, "Shopping spree, anyone? Hashtag treat yourself, hashtag no limits," while the French Revolution is brewing right outside her gilded gates. It would be a complete disaster, but we'd love to watch her unravel with every tweet, knowing the revolution is coming for her. But that wouldn't stop her from trying to trend with hashtag queen life. And lastly, let's talk about Leonardo da Vinci. You thought you were the only one on Instagram flexing with your art? Leonardo would be the ultimate humble brag artist of Twitter, constantly posting mind-blowing sketches, cryptic genius thoughts, and probably tweeting out his to-do list. His first tweet would probably be something like, "Just finished a sketch of the human body. We've only scratched the surface. Hashtag art is life, hashtag Renaissance man." And you know he'd be posting time-lapse videos of him working on the Mona Lisa, with hashtags like, hashtag WIP, hashtag masterpiece in progress. He'd be the one who constantly tweeted about the link between art, science, and the human spirit, sharing deep thoughts like, "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Hashtag Da Vinci wisdom, hashtag the mind at work," while his followers tried to decipher every tweet for hidden codes and secrets. Now, imagine what would have happened if these historical figures could communicate with the world through Twitter. How much more connected we might have felt to them. They'd be controversial, brilliant, and utterly captivating, making history feel more present than ever. But what do you think? If these icons of history had Twitter accounts, what would they say? What would their first tweet be? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep imagining how these historical legends would have navigated the modern world, one tweet at a time.